Currently, growth forecasts for Q1 lie in around 0.43% according to the FT, indicating that despite this recent bout of jitters, the UK economy is expected to maintain a very similar pace of growth to that experienced in Q4 of 2015. Annual GDP growth in 2015 was measured at a total of 1.9%, with quarterly growth averaging 0.5%, indicating remarkably steady growth given recent volatility. However, it is important to remember that 2015 ended on a soft note, with the UK economy relying on its large services sector for the bulk of its growth, as a slowing global economy hurt demand for British exports.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In February, I concluded that the most resilient component of the UK economy was the consumer sector. 2016 was kick-started by the great British consumer spending at its fastest pace in 18 months. Month-on-month sales rose by 2.3%, whilst year-on-year they experienced a rise of 5.2%. However, sales released on the 24th of March may give us a better indication of where we are at, as these will not factor in temporary factors such as January discounts. The fundamentals all appear to be strong. Households' living standards and spending power have risen, aided by falling unemployment, near-zero inflation, and steady wage growth.
Could I ask another question, please, about the correlation you showed between house prices and consumption? What do you think is the underlying economics of that, please?
I think the most obvious piece of economics behind the idea of high house prices causing or inducing acceleration of consumer expenditure is the idea of the strong positive wealth effect associated with that. With a large amount of homeowners in the UK, unlike other European countries such as Germany, when there are high house prices, you end up having homeowners feel more confident, more secure about their prospects in the future, and because homeowners are also consumers, this leads them to consume more, to spend more. And that's certainly, I think, probably the prima facie explanation, the most obvious one, but there are others.
Also, not only confidence, but homeowners can actually increase their spending through extra withdrawal, so they can capitalise on increased house prices and actually take out a loan against the value of the house because of the increase in value, so that can be a direct way of increasing consumption.
And also, we only considered this morning, actually we had a discussion this morning, how we were trying to explain our correlation, and we realised that there's a distinct chance of a third variable here. Like increased confidence will in the economy, increased credit conditions in the economy will lead to increased house prices as more able to take out mortgages, and it would also increase consumption at the same time. And so we should, if we were given further time, we would have.
I mean, statistics are never going to tell you if correlation equals causation, but we do feel quite confident in the mechanics behind the processes by which house prices increase consumption ultimately.
If we had a research department, maybe we would have conducted a multiple
all I'd say is that it sounds as though you had this morning the sort of discussions that the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee has.
China also displays significant deflationary risk, with growth expected to slow from 6.8% today to 6% forecast by the World Bank for 2017. This is broadly thought to be part of a managed slowdown as China rebalances towards a more sustainable growth model led by domestic consumption. We were very fortunate to have the chance to ask the Chinese President Xi Jinping the reason for this slowdown, and he said to us that the environment is the most pressing matter, so we are shifting to a slower, more sustainable growth rate. Perhaps a political statement, but regardless, I believe this will have a number of effects on UK inflation. First, as the largest commodity consumer in the world, a falling growth rate should lead to lower commodity prices. Second, China is important to UK trade, especially as an import partner. This slowdown will no doubt reduce the demand for British goods, worsening the trade deficit further. Thirdly, a slowdown in China will also have a significant impact on both global growth and global confidence. As one of the main engines of global growth, the transition from an export-led towards a domestically driven economy is having, and will continue to have, a negative effect on economies around the world.
So when you talk to your business advisor, I can't remember his name now, or if you talk to businesses, is there an explanation for the reluctance to invest? Because actually, if you look at the numbers, there does seem to be plenty to invest in.
I
think the problem is that people are still underconfident from the financial crisis, and if they do have the profits, they are actually quite unwilling to use their own money to invest. They sort of want to keep those profits for, you know, safe margins almost. But then obviously when they go to the banks and say, please will you lend us some money? Well, they say, well, you've got this money, you've got these profits, why aren't you investing? But I think that everyone is more risk averse. So the banks don't want to lend to the SMEs. I think there's a real problem in the UK economy that there isn't the funds for the SMEs. So where will our long run productivity go? If there is, you know, we were speaking to Ian Gooden, he said that they, a lot of the companies that he's talked to are more in like the computer industry, so they're coming up with software, and then if you go to a bank and say, will you loan us some money to develop this new software, and they say, actually, we can't do that because we can't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of problems relating to SMEs.
Also, he said that a lot of when companies go to banks to try and get a loan, they will pitch their idea to someone who then pitches it, and then that person who they've pitched it to pitches it to someone else who will then decide if they get a loan. So they can't, there's
no immediate reaction.
Yeah, there's someone in the middle that might not.
So I think that demonstrates that there is a lot like of risk aversion in that sense.
Good morning. Recently, inflation has risen off the 0% mark, which it has been fluctuating around, but has remained very low and outside of target. In both our November and February presentations, we proposed lowering the base rate by 25 basis points and maintaining QE at its current level. Upon reviewing the most recent data, we continue to view this as the appropriate policy measure. This step is designed to achieve two goals. Firstly, to combat the near-term deflationary risk we see arising from developments in the global economy, and secondly, to signal strongly our intent to normalise the inflationary environment. In addition to lowering the base rate, we further propose that a recommendation be made to the government to raise the UK's permanent inflation target to 4%, plus or minus 1%, in order to prevent becoming trapped in a low growth, low inflation, low interest rate equilibrium in the long term.
The government has highlighted the long-term risk of becoming trapped in a low growth, low inflation, low interest rate equilibrium. In order to prevent this from happening, we, as a committee, have reached the unanimous decision to submit a proposal to Her Majesty's Government to raise the inflation target to 4%, plus or minus 1%. In order for this to be effective, it requires a greater degree of cooperation and coordination between fiscal, financial, prudential, and monetary policy setters in the future. Specifically, they should collectively aim to combat and to counter the causes of the very low natural interest rates that are becoming increasingly prevalent in the economy.
Okay, could I ask a couple of questions, please? First of all, if I'm staying on the Phillips curve, now we're supposed to have inflation of 2%. Should I read off your curve that that's likely to mean that unemployment goes up again?
Okay, so well, we think that the Phillips curve is relatively flat. So although it does seem like there's some kind of relationship, we do think that it's flat and it's also flattening. So there's really no trade-off. And this could be, this is due to, well, we think the fact that maybe NAIRA is lower than we actually think. And that was highlighted by Mark Carney in his January speech at the beginning of the year. And he said that because of like factors that we've said before, so increased labour flexibility and underemployment, NAIRA is actually lower than we think. So although any kind of shift in employment above that level won't really have any kind of impact.
However, also looking at a Phillips curve, we do say that there are shifts in time. So although inflation may increase to 2%, this does not necessarily mean, like right now, there is, as Savina said, there isn't a trade-off. But in the future, as the Phillips curve shifts, we could see a potential increase in unemployment. But that depends on how the Phillips curve is shifting. But looking at our really flexible labour force, looking at high participation ratios and structure of our economy, we can say that right now we wouldn't say that unemployment would increase with increasing inflation.